I imagine we've probably got our work cut out for the evening with this. This is a culture perfectly honed to the desert, but it isn't Nubian. To see if there are any traces of the old Nubian civilization, I'm going to have to head out of these desert zones further south. Central Sudan, and here is the landscape of ancient Nubia. It's just great to see this green environment, and it's just so reminiscent of what Kerma must have been like. Not just the housing, the farming technology, but just the landscape. This green landscape is just what it must have been like. "700 miles south of Kerma, the land that still enjoys regular rainfall is sought after by pastoral communities. And the frontier between desert and green continues to be a source of conflict, just as it was for Egyptians and Nubians 3,500 years ago. These are UN vehicles going off to Darfur. I mean, it's fascinating that the same sorts of issues of food, resources, of power are still, in a way, the dynamic thing that infuses this landscape even today. A key component of the recent fighting in Darfur in Western Sudan was a dispute over lush, well-watered pastures. The same issues were a factor in the deadly civil war that engulfed southern Sudan for over 20 years. These lush green hills were recently a battleground. It's so glorious, so idyllic here. It's hard to believe that only a decade ago that this place was the site of a civil war. I was just wandering around just a few minutes ago and found a spent bullet case, and there were dozens of them scattered across here. And it's not just a recent thing. Over centuries, people had fought over this landscape. And in a sense, the history, the story that we're telling, is of that being replayed over centuries and centuries. The name of these hills reflects that history. These are the Nuba Hills, and the Nuba people believe that they are descended from the ancient kingdom of Nubia. I've come here with Shaza Rahal, educated in Britain, but a member of a traditional ruling family here. Her uncle, the leader of the village community, remembers the family traditions well.
أنا اسمي محمود إبراهيم تولي. تولي ده جد جاي.
He comes from a royal family. They arrived many years ago.
And many years ago, how many years might that be?
قبال كم سنة لمن ده حصل؟
الكلام ده يعني الحروب بتاع.
This is roughly around 300 years ago.
Their tradition says that they originally came from an area near Merowe, that ancient Nubian city, more than 500 miles away. I'm really keen to find out if there is a connection between the people of this region, the Nuba, and ancient of Nubia. I'm just really keen if this very much living place has a connection with that old mythology.
هم النوبيان في مصر والنوبة في الشمال والنوبة في الجبال كلهم واحد كلهم واحد اتفرقوا.
They're all the same people, they just separated. So there's some that stayed in Egypt, some came to Sudan, and الباقي مشوا وين؟
الباقي فضلوا وين في مروي.
to Meroe. The rest stayed in Meroe. The only difference between here and there, you will see, is the color of the skin.
Really?
But in terms of the language, it's the same. The traditions are the same.
Can there really be a connection between the people in this region and the ancient civilization of Nubia, born more than 7,000 years ago to the sound of a rock gong? The extraordinary thing is that although we're miles from ancient Nubian lands, there do seem to be some echoes of those far-off times. Today the young men still compete in what has become their most famous sport, wrestling. The wrestling's in just the same style as in the pictures from 1500 BC that Mahmud showed me at Jebel Barkal. The same stance, the same grips even. Can I finally get to grips with this ancient civilization I've been searching for? I have to have a go. Wait. That's just amazing. But suddenly, I begin to realise this is just like those ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs of wrestlers. Just like it. Of course, the similarities in style of their wrestling may be a coincidence. If there really is an inheritance from old Nubia, it should show up in more fundamental features of the Nuba way of life. Abdu, a cattle drover, certainly believes that the way of doing things hasn't changed in a long time.
It has gone through tradition, through history, through family. And from an early age, everyone is allocated a certain number of cows.
Oh, really?
Yes. So that they can raise them, and they feed from them, like they use the milk from them to grow their children, and then they build on those. So obviously then the more cows you have, the more wealth you have.
So cattle are absolutely integral to politics, to culture, to weaving the whole of this community together.
Yes.
There are cattle cultures like this one right across Africa, from here in the hills of Sudan down to KwaZulu in South Africa. And so many of them are connected to kingship. It's possible that many of these stories may have begun in ancient Nubia, right the way back to the rock art people and Kerma. The Kambala is Nubia's most important dance. Its origins are in ceremonies which initiate young men as full members of Nuba society. These headdresses are made out of cattle skulls. And I'm struck by something. At Kerma, the great burial mound was surrounded by 5,000 cattle skulls, just like these. Perhaps they were once the headdresses worn by dancers at the king's funeral. impossible to be convinced by this. I mean, this is those ancient Kerma cultures just brought to life. I mean, the cattle. I mean, you can just feel it. This is women singing about the cattle. This is men reliving those ancient traditions. This is absolutely everything that I've seen along the journey, but made it alive in this incredible dance. Are these people the descendants of that ancient kingdom? There seems to be an inheritance expressed in traditions about cattle, about wrestling, and in legends about an ancient homeland. Beyond that, it's difficult to be certain of the links between the people of Nuba and those of ancient Nubia. But such a connection would only be icing on the cake. The most important thing is the weight of evidence we now have the existence of Nubia as a remarkable, long-lasting, and indigenous kingdom. Nubia wasn't a barbarian wasteland on the fringes of civilization, as the Egyptians and Romans would have us believe. It was a real power, which developed independently and rivaled the Pharaohs, a place with a distinctive way of life. In the end, it became a victim of climate change. But I think that Nubian ideas of power, wealth, and kingship continue to resonate in modern Africa.
We're setting off on a journey of discovery in the wake of Egypt's first female ruler tomorrow here on BBC4. The pharaoh who conquered the sea is at 9.